In 1990, the Italian Prime Minister stood before his parliament and made an announcement that shocked the entire chamber. He revealed that a secret network of armed paramilitary cells had existed in Italy since the end of World War II. Armed, trained, supplied with hidden weapons caches buried across the country. Connected to NATO, the CIA, and Italian intelligence services. This network was called Gladio, and similar networks, he revealed, existed in every NATO country in Western Europe. Their official purpose was resistance against Soviet invasion. If the Red Army ever occupied Western Europe, these hidden networks would fight back from the shadows. That was the official story. The reality was far more disturbing. Because Gladio and its equivalent networks were not primarily used against Soviet invaders. They were used against domestic political opponents, against labor unions, against left-wing political parties, against elected governments that the CIA considered dangerously sympathetic to communism. What followed from that 1990 revelation was one of the biggest political scandals in post-war European history. This is History in the Shadow. Subscribe and follow our Facebook page. We need your support to keep bringing these rare stories to you. Let's start the story. To understand Operation Gladio, you need to understand the specific fear that drove it. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Western military planners were genuinely terrified of a Soviet conventional military invasion of Western Europe. This fear was not unreasonable. The Soviet Union had the largest conventional army in Europe, millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, overwhelming numerical superiority in ground forces. Most NATO wargames in this period assumed that a Soviet invasion would quickly overrun West Germany and potentially sweep to the English Channel. In this context, American military planners looked to the lessons of World War II, the French resistance, the Norwegian underground, the Italian partisans. These movements had proven that organized civilian resistance behind enemy lines was militarily significant even under full occupation. The logical extension was simple. If Western Europe falls to Soviet invasion, pre-positioned resistance networks should already be in place, people already trained, weapons already hidden, radios already installed. The CIA took the lead in organizing these networks across Western Europe, working with the intelligence services of each NATO country. In Italy, the network became known as Gladio. In Belgium, it was called SDRA-8. In Turkey, counter-guerrilla. Every NATO country, and some neutral countries like Switzerland and Austria, had a version of the same concept. In their original conception, these networks had a legitimate defensive purpose. What they became is a different story entirely. The Italian case is the most extensively documented and the most disturbing. Italy in the post-war period had the largest communist party in Western Europe. The Italian Communist Party regularly received 25 to 30% of the vote in national elections. It was not a fringe movement. It was a major political force with genuine working-class support. The CIA viewed this with deep alarm. A communist electoral victory in Italy, even through completely democratic means, would be, in their view, a geopolitical catastrophe. Italy might leave NATO. Soviet influence would reach the Mediterranean. This fear drove American intervention in Italian politics that was extensive, well-documented, and by any democratic standard, deeply wrong. The CIA funded centrist and right-wing Italian political parties throughout the Cold War. The specific amounts are confirmed in declassified American government records. Hundreds of millions of dollars over 4 decades, paid to political parties competing in democratic elections by a foreign intelligence agency. But the intervention went further than money. In the 1970s, Italy experienced a period of extraordinary political violence known as the Anni di Piombo, the Years of Lead. During this period, bombings, assassinations, and terrorist attacks came from both left-wing and right-wing organizations. The left-wing Red Brigades conducted genuine terrorism. They kidnapped and murdered a former Italian prime minister in 1978. Their violence was real. But right-wing terrorism connected to intelligence networks was also operating simultaneously, and investigations found something deeply troubling, that elements of the Italian security apparatus had been involved in facilitating right-wing terrorist violence as part of a deliberate political strategy. This strategy came to be known as the strategy of tension. The logic was deeply cynical. If the Italian public could be kept in a state of fear, convinced that social order was threatened, that only strong government could protect them, they would be less likely to vote for the communist left, and more likely to support the CIA-backed center-right parties. Create terror. Blame chaos. Win elections. The clearest evidence of this strategy is the Bologna train station bombing of August 2, 1980. It was a Saturday morning in summer. The waiting room of Bologna Centrale was packed with families on their way to holiday destinations, children, elderly couples, students. At 10:05 in the morning, a bomb exploded in the waiting room. 85 people were killed. More than 200 were injured. The investigation lasted decades. In 1995, 2 members of a neo-fascist organization were convicted. In 2020, a third was convicted. But the investigations also found something beyond the individual perpetrators. Members of a clandestine organization called Propaganda Do, whose membership list of approximately 900 people included senior figures from Italian intelligence, the military, politics, and business, were implicated in providing support and covering up the attack. Italy's Parliamentary Commission on Terrorism, which completed its work in 2000, concluded that elements of Italian intelligence had definitively participated in planning and covering up right-wing terrorism during the years of lead. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the formal conclusion of a parliamentary investigation. Italy was not the only country where the networks went beyond their stated purpose. In Greece, the stay-behind network was connected to the military junta that ruled the country from 1967 to 1974. Military officers connected to the stay-behind network were among the junta's leadership. They suspended democratic government, imprisoned political opponents, tortured dissidents, and censored the press. And the United States supported the Greek military junta throughout its 7-year rule. The network created to protect Greek democracy helped destroy it, and the American government that created the network supported the result. In Belgium, a stay-behind network was allegedly connected to a series of violent armed robberies in the 1980s that killed 28 people. The robberies appeared economically irrational. The violence seemed designed to create fear rather than accumulate wealth. Investigations were conducted, but the full truth was never officially established. The Brabound killings remain officially unsolved. In Turkey, the stay-behind network called counter-guerrilla has been implicated in the intense political violence of the 1970s that eventually led to military intervention in Turkish civilian government. In Germany, investigations found the network had recruited partly from individuals with connections to the Nazi era, people whose anti-communism predated the Cold War by decades. The pattern across multiple countries pointed in the same direction. Stay-behind infrastructure that was supposed to resist Soviet invaders was in at least some cases being used against the democratic populations it was supposed to protect. The organizational architecture that made all of this possible was a NATO body called the Allied Clandestine Committee. This committee met periodically to coordinate the stay-behind networks across all member countries. This is one of the most significant facts revealed in 1990. The networks were not bilateral CIA to host country secrets. They were formally coordinated at NATO level. The entire alliance organization had institutional knowledge of the system. The democratic parliaments of NATO member countries had no knowledge at all. Weapons were buried under Italian hillsides. Operatives were trained at secret facilities in Sardinia. Right-wing organizations connected to intelligence networks bombed a train station, killing 85 people. And the elected governments nominally responsible for these intelligence services either did not know or claimed not to know because the programs operated at classification levels above what parliamentary oversight could access. After the 1990 revelations, governments across Europe were forced to respond. Their official position was consistent. The stay-behind networks were purely defensive. They had never been used for domestic political purposes. Any claims of terrorism involvement were either false or involved rogue elements acting without authorization. This position has significant credibility problem. The Italian Parliamentary Commission found evidence of security apparatus involvement in right-wing terrorism. The Greek record is too clear to deny. The Belgian investigation found activities beyond the stated defensive purpose. The pattern is consistent with systematic use of stay-behind infrastructure for domestic political purposes, particularly in countries where communist parties had significant electoral support. The specific question, who authorized what at the senior level and what the CIA actually knew about domestic operations, was never definitively answered. Key witnesses died. Documents were destroyed in the weeks between the public revelation and the formal investigations. The classified record remains incomplete in multiple countries even today. Operation Gladio is important not just as Cold War history. It is a case study in a permanent problem of democratic governance. The stay-behind networks were created by democratic governments for a purpose that had at least a plausible defensive rationale. They were funded from intelligence budgets not subject to normal parliamentary oversight, recruited from networks that operated outside normal legal constraints. And in at least some countries, they were used for purposes that no democratic mandate would have authorized. When governments create secret structures outside democratic accountability, those structures tend to develop their own logic and their own purposes that can diverge dramatically from their stated mission. The people who created these networks genuinely believed they were protecting Western democracy from Soviet totalitarianism. Some of them were right about the Soviet threat, but in trying to defend democracy through anti-democratic methods, they did damage to the very institutions they believed they were protecting. The families of 85 people killed at Bologna Central Station on an August Saturday morning are still waiting for complete justice. The weapons are mostly recovered now. The Cold War is over. The networks have been officially disbanded. But the structural question remains. How do democratic societies prevent secret structures from developing purposes contrary to democratic values? Operation Gladio proved that this question is not theoretical. It is the most important question in democratic governance, and it is still unanswered.